As Dr. Deming believed, working together is fundamental to both solving and preventing problems, providing the ability to continuously improve how we operate towards this end, individual and group proficiency in the principles and examples of working together is fundamental to how we learn, and think together. And what I focus on in my consulting is what does that mean? What does it mean to work, learn, and think together? And this is some insights on that. And then close with the closing sentence. There's in the new economy, systematic utilization of resources will be a necessary condition fundamental to how all organizations operate. It was Dr. Deming's vision. All right, so I've broken the presentation into some welcoming remarks and then the red bead experiment, which hopefully all of you are familiar with, and if not, it'll be a slide overview with a little bit of twist. And then an activity I refer to as a trip report, and then resource management, and then some closing comments. So Deming, as many of you know, was born in 1900, died in 1993. I met him in 1990 when he was 89. And that was the first time I met him. I met him twice. I met him when he was giving 3 lectures at a university not far from where I lived. And then I was at his very last seminar and have one of his very last autographs. He was in very frail condition at the time. So I met him twice. And as I say to people, I never asked him a question. The first time I didn't have a question to ask because it was new to me. It was over my head. And then the last time I met him, he was in such frail shape. I didn't want to ask him a question. He was in. So anyway, I met him. But when Dr. Deming, what he said about questions, Dr. Deming was very big at questions. He said the questions are more important than the answers because the questions allowed him to get a sense of where people are coming from. And so if any of you have a burning question, you can raise your hand. You can reach out to me either on LinkedIn. You can reach me on my Yahoo email. When I throw out questions to you, your answers to me are a reflection of how you think. And there'll be some opportunities for you to respond to some questions. That's when I throw up a mirror and I'll give you a chance to pause and reflect. Also, I'm hoping that you'll need a sheet of paper for at least one of the exercises. So have something handy to write on, either A4 paper or 8.5 by 11 if you're in the States. So Junichi Taguchi I met before Dr. Deming, and I was enamored with his work. And by the time I met Dr. Deming in 1990, I was head over heels with Dr. Taguchi's work. So I met Taguchi in 87. I met Deming as I showed in 1990. And so Deming gave us the 14 points. That's Deming 1980s. And we're going to look at one of these points later in the presentation. So this is either a reminder or a refresher of the 14 points. So I spent a great deal of time with Dr. Taguchi, a great deal of time with Russ Akoff, and you'll hear their names in this presentation. So traditional quality that I continue to see in my consulting is quality is defined as conformance to requirements. That's Phil Crosby quality, compliance quality, which is much different than what Dr. Deming had in mind. Phil Crosby is all about doing it right the first time, where right means meet requirements. So I have a friend that I was mentoring, 30-some years ago, and I helped her get a job and move from Rocketdyne to a toy company in Chicago, where their number one product was bottling water with soap into these containers that kids would go off and use at birthday parties for blowing bubbles. So she went in as a manufacturing engineer. A year later, she was named plant manager. And after she was named plant manager, she called me up and she said, what should I focus on first? In my response to her, I had known her for a few years. I said to her, what do you think you should focus on first? And her answer was very traditional. I get this answer all the time. The answer was, I think I should focus on all the things that are broken. And my comment to her was, that doesn't require any thinking. That's just being 100% reactive, waiting for the fires to happen. What Dr. Deming is saying is, of course, we have to fight fires, but putting the fire out is not improvement. Putting the fire out puts you back to where you were before the fire. And so what I want to share with you is this mindset is alive and well today. What can we do instead? I want to give you some insights there. So the red bead experiment. So Dr. Deming and the willing workers, he'd invite them up on stage, either 4 workers or 6 workers, and he'd give them a paddle and a bowl of white beads and red beads. And so they would put the paddle into the bowl, and the red beads represent what the customer doesn't want. What the customer wants is white beads. And so the data I'm about to share with you comes from chapter 7 of the New Economics, which is dedicated to the red bead experiment. That is the ball in the net or not? Yes or no? And there's a line, just like in terms of how manufacturing works. There's a line, and if you're inside the line, it's good. That's a white bead. If you're outside the line, that's bad. It's a red bead. And so in the world of soccer, we have the same model. The ball is either in the net or not. And so the process that Dr. Deming shared with the workers was to mix the incoming material. So they would pour it from one container into another. They would then produce the beads, which is sticking the paddle in. You can see Dr. Deming's hand holding the paddle. And then they would remove the paddle with white beads and red beads, go to the inspector. The inspector would count how many red beads, being the defects, and the results would be recorded. And in the New Economics, chapter 7, Dr. Deming has these results from 6 willing workers, and they'd have 6 volunteers go through it 4 times. And then Dr. Deming would do the classic Western management. He would look at the workers that had the most number of red beads, and he'd fire them. He'd berate them. He'd get angry with them. And then he would praise Larry, because Larry only had 29. So Larry would get the bonus. Larry would get all the awards and recognition, and the other workers would be berated. That's Western management today. Then Dr. Deming went on to say, well, wait a minute. Instead of looking at the red beads, looking at those 2 data points in isolation, what if we step back and plot this data as a run chart and look at the number of red beads going up and down each day, right? And so instead of looking at any two data points in isolation, what if, and so what Dr. Deming talks about in the New Economics is, he said, let's be honest, people wish to do their best. The workers were trying to do a good job even when they knew they couldn't. There was ignorance on variation, right? We need an appreciation that the red beads are caused by the system, not the workers taken separately. The workers are part of the system. And if that's understood, then you can calculate control limits. You can realize that this is all common cause variation. In this example, because everything is closed, you've got that bowl of those workers, you've got a closed system, you would only expect the results to be above and below the control limits on into the future. So what do the red beads represent? As I mentioned earlier, the red beads represent things the customer doesn't want in terms of quality. Those are things that are bad, not good. How do we eliminate the red beads? Well, we can go to our suppliers and stop buying red beads, perhaps. Okay, that's a classic way of eliminating the red beads is don't buy them in the first place. Don't allow them into the bowl in the first place. But what do the white beads represent? And so with our daughter, who's a junior high school English teacher for the Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest in the United States, when I asked her, I said, so Allison, what are the red beads in your classroom? And she says, well, a door that doesn't close, a computer that doesn't work, a stapler that doesn't work, a window which is cracked. So then I say, okay, so those are the red beads. What are the white beads? She says, well, the white beads could be a projector that works, a door that closes, a stapler that works. So the red beads are the defects, the things that are in the way, things that we don't want, in our organizations, and the white beads being the things that are good, things that the customer is asking for, or in Allison's case, the things she needs to present English, to her students. All right, we'll come back to that. Now let's look at the trip report. So in the New Economics, Dr. Deming says the aim of this chapter, and every chapter has a name, the prevailing system of management must undergo transformation. The system cannot understand itself, requires an outside view. And so what I started doing some 25 years ago is thinking, what is Dr. Deming talking about, this prevailing system of management? What does that really mean? How does that translate to people? How do I make it more tangible? That's what I want to share with you. The outside view, Dr. Deming said, the layout of profound knowledge appears in 4 parts, all related to each other. So it's understanding systems, variation, theory of knowledge, and psychology. Okay. The first step, Dr. Deming said, is transformation of the individual. He said the transformation is discontinuous. It comes from an understanding of the system of profound knowledge. And the individual transformed, he believed, will perceive new meaning to his life, to events, to numbers, to interactions between people. So when I worked for the Deming Institute, part of my job for 2.5 years was answering inquiries from people, inquiries such as, what is meant by the Deming philosophy? Questions such as, is the Deming philosophy widely applicable? When I'd ask people about that, I say, well, what do you mean by that? And they would say, I work for a nonprofit organization. Do these ideas apply to me? And I'd say, yeah, why do you ask? And I say, well, because many of Dr. Deming's examples are about manufacturing, and I get the feeling that his ideas only apply to manufacturing. I said, oh, no. But I can understand that concern, but no, they're widely applicable. So what I started doing years before joining the Institute when I was at Rocketdyne is I came up with my own way of explaining what I thought Dr. Deming was trying to say, and I built it upon this question. How did you do on the exam? And the reason I selected that question, in part, is because I'm convinced this is a question that every one of us has either asked someone or a question that somebody has asked us. And we said, and the answer is, I think I did okay. I think I did great. I don't think I did well. But this is a question that I believe I have found to be in my travels around the world, explaining Dr. Deming's idea. This is a universally accepted question. We understand what it means. We know how to answer it. So one of the first times I asked it was I asked a coworker's sister. She was a college student. She had to interview somebody in an organization, ask them some questions for a business class she was taking, and then write a report about what this person does. And so she asked me what I do. I said I ask people questions, and she asked what kind of questions. And as a student, I said, well, how about the question, how did you do on the exam? It was a question she acknowledged she had heard before. So I asked her, I said, draw a rectangle, have an arrow going out the right, that's the output. And what I want to explore with you, I said to her, are what are the inputs? And as soon as I asked her that question, she said the following. She said, well, the inputs are my commitment, my talent, and my energy. I said, okay, that's 3. What else? And I waited a good 15 seconds, maybe even longer. It might have been 30 seconds. She couldn't think of anything else. She was stuck at 3. So I said, well, have you ever had a situation in a classroom where another student asked a question and you learned from it and it impacted your grade? She said, it happens all the time. I said, well, then that means other students are an input. And so she wrote that down. I said, okay, given other students are an input, can you now think of other inputs? Now, within seconds, she says, my parents, my brother, my professor. And I said, well, how many inputs are there? She said, there's an infinite number of inputs. I said, that's funny because a few minutes ago you were stuck at 3 and now you're telling me it's an infinite number. And then she was kind of embarrassed that she couldn't think beyond the 3. But now she realized we've got the publisher of the book, the author of the book, janitorial staff, the rest of the staff in the school, right? It's a big system. So what I then said to her was, if there's an infinite number of inputs, then is there something wrong with the original question? In other words, and this is I want to throw out to the audience, Chris, to see if anybody raises their hand, and that is, if we have this long list of inputs, does this question reflect that long list of inputs, or should we change this question? Okay. So let me know, Chris, if
anybody wants to take up that challenge today. I don't see any hands going up, but if I would offer a suggestion, I would think that it is the wrong question, Bill. I think the question may be, how did we do on the exam?
You think the question, Chris, should be, how did we do on the exam? Why do you say that, Chris?
Because to give consideration to all of the other factors, and you realize is much more than yourself. If I look at it in terms of my talent, my abilities, is a silo my mentality into just thinking about me and I. But if I start considering all of these other parts as giving inputs and these interactions as being important, I start to recognize is, it's beyond myself. So the
That's
system
right.
includes everyone.
That's right.
I'm also seeing a hand from Dr. Mungal, so let me give her the floor.
Okay. Chris, you said someone was gonna comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello,
Yes.
Dr. Mungal. How are you doing?
Very good. You asked whether it's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. Because ultimately the performance is your performance. You have not asked how did other people help you to do on the exam.
Well,
or how did the system help you to do on the exam?
Well, here's what I explained to my students last night. If I was to say to Chris, if I'm the professor and I say to Chris, how did you do on the exam? what I asked my graduate students last night was, what does that question say about my relationship to Chris? And the answers were, it showed that I cared about his learning. And that's a pretty common answer. But then someone figured out that the question, how did you do on the exam, implies that I am an observer of Chris's learning, not a participant. And so what I would come from is, if I'm asking how are you doing in sales, that is not a question that makes me a participant. That's me saying, how are you doing in sales? If I change it to how are we doing in sales, now I'm talking about working together. But my proposal is the question, how did you do, infers separation between me, the professor, and the student. And that's where I'm coming from is, and until we change that pronoun, I remain an observer of his learning. But I believe that we're stuck in a mindset of thinking that learning is caused by the student, that the red beads are caused by the student, or the red beads are caused by the willing workers. And what Dr. Deming is saying is learning is caused by the system, which includes him as a professor, which is why he did not grade his students. Because he felt the grade was a measure of them and it was not representative of the system. And that's where I'm coming from with Chris's answer, is that the mindset of how did you do infers separation. A question about how are we doing implies collaboration and that we're in this together. And so my point is that as soon as the professor shows up as an input, then this grade is not the student's grade. It's a measure of the education system. So to understand systems is to understand that the grade is a measure of all of this, not just one person. Myron Tribus would say that what we see depends upon what we thought before we looked. Myron Tribus being a former dean of engineering, former government official, former executive with Xerox, and a very close friend and collaborator of Dr. Deming. And the reason I love this quote is that if we go around asking how did we do on the proposal, how did we do on the sale, how did we do on service accountability, how did we do on the performance measures, those questions are about participation. As soon as I change the question to how did you do, how did you do, how did you do, those questions put me into the observer status. And so where the paper and pencil come in is I'd like you to, for those who want to participate in this, is to draw a matrix similar to this. So that's a sheet of paper, divide it in half vertically, horizontally into 4 quadrants. And the exercise of the trip report, which I'll abbreviate in the interest of the time that we have, is I would say to people, imagine each of you has recently spent 2 weeks visiting both of these organizations. A we organization, which is deeply enmeshed in a sense of, participation and not observation. How are we doing in sales? How are we doing in research and development? How are we doing on the proposal? How are we doing in working with our suppliers? Versus a me organization, which is how are you, how are you, how are you? So I say, imagine we've got each of those organizations out there, and imagine everyone on the call has recently visited both organizations for 2 weeks. Why 2 weeks? Because for the first week, what I ask people to do is for the first week, I say, imagine you're walking through both organizations. There's no one there. And so imagine what you're writing down are, what do these organizations look like? This is what Edgar Schein would say. What are the physical manifestations of both organizations? What are their characteristics? And all you know is, when I say this to you, is if all you know is one is all about we, one is all about me, what is that? What might you see in those organizations that's revealing of that mindset that Myron would talk about? And then for the second week of both organizations, what if there were people there? What would the people be like in both organizations? And so when I asked the students last night, I said, so what might be an example of a characteristic of a we organization? And they said an open space without a lot of walls, very low cubicles, if any, a lot of space for collaboration, very bright. All right. And what might they see in a me organization? Very tall walls, lots of separation between departments. Then I say, so what about the people in a me organization? And they would say, people that are looking over their shoulder, people that are hoarding information, not willing to share it with others, people looking for awards for themselves. Then I say, I'm sorry, what would you say for people in a we organization? And they say, people that want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so when I give people, typically I would give people 5 minutes to put as much as you can into each cells. I would then have them stand up, go share their experiences with others. The room typically erupts with laughter when they begin to share and see how similar the others' results are. So let me share with you, if I was to go around the room, as I've done hundreds of times, and ask people, what do you see in these 4 quadrants? That's a handwritten version. This is what people share with me, whether I'm doing it across the UK, New Zealand, the Middle East, the Netherlands. This is a very standard set of results from asking these questions since 1998. People would say the we organization, no walls, well lighted, well organized, not a lot of waste, perhaps a yoga class schedule, daycare on site, material receiving, visible metrics. So what do you see in a me organization? Walls, individual departments, separate and distinct work areas, not well maintained, outdated facilities, poor utilization of assets, quality signs, as Dr. Deming would say, slogans, candle lights, empty slogans, someone looking over their shoulder, dictatorial, individualistic behavior, quota-driven, punitive, on a time clock. What about people in a we organization? Again, I've done this exercise with fishing captains in New Zealand and get results very, very similar to this from people whose work is going off the coast of New Zealand for 2 weeks, out 200 miles to come back with a catch. They have very similar results. On the floor management, open lines of communication, enjoy working, highly motivated, attentive, part of the solution, the smiling. So the artifacts from Edgar Schein, the artifacts are, what are the things you're seeing? And Edgar Schein, a theorist, organizational theorist who worked with Peter Senge, sadly died earlier this year. Brilliant person. I met him once for a week. And he said, artifacts are the constructed environment of an organization, including its architecture, its technology, its layout, its dress code, visible and audible behaviors in public documents like employee orientation. And this is what is so cool is when I ask people these questions, what comes out is a very common set of artifacts for both organizations. And then Schein says, well, the artifacts come from values. What are the values? Schein says values are the reasons or rationalizations for why members behave the way they do. And then he says the values come from assumptions. And they are typically, he says, an unconscious pattern that determines how group members perceive, think, and feel. And my proposal is that shifting people's thinking from how did you do on the exam to how do we, that fundamental shift in mindset creates two different sets of assumptions, two different sets of values, and two different sets of artifacts. And I've got, again, over 25 years of experience around the world and seeing this. What I learned from Shine, Peter Senge said, is that culture are the assumptions we cannot see. He said, it's hard to know, Senge says, it's hard to know what fish talk about, but you can be damn sure it isn't the water. And so what Dr. Deming's talking about is what's creating these behaviors within organizations comes from a mindset of separation. So then I asked the students last night, I said, what % of organizations operate as a me organization with those behaviors, those artifacts, those beliefs? And the answer they gave us, the answer I get year after year, week after week, is the majority. Majority of organizations, people tell me, operate on the right-hand side of this model. Well, Dr. Deming referred to that as the prevailing system of management. And so part of what I was doing at Rocketdyne is instead of talking about the prevailing system of management and reciting Deming, what I was trying to do is have them articulate through this trip report based on the simple model, the difference between how did you do and how did we do, and what does that evoke in your awareness of this model? And it works beautifully. But there is no such thing as a me or we organization. It's just a model. And so instead of asking if your organization is me or we, the bigger question is, in which direction are organizations moving? And sadly, I think it's very easy to move in the me direction and to become worse and worse and worse. As we blame the workers for the grades, as we blame them for the red beads, what does that create? It creates people who focus inwardly, and that just creates a bigger cycle of pain. So what about resource management? So let's go back to my friend. What should I focus on first? What do you think you should focus on first? I think I ought to focus on all the things that are broken. So imagine what would happen within your organizations if beginning at the opening of operations tomorrow morning, all processes produced 100% white beads remain that way forever. Imagine through some miracle overnight, all the red beads are gone. They're no longer being purchased. They're nowhere within the organization. So I use this as a theoretical to say to people, what would organizations be like if this really happened? And I say, what changes would you begin to imagine to occur hour by hour, day by day, month by month, year by year, as more and more people become aware that there are no more red beads? What is that like? And people would say, if they're in the quality organization, they'd say, their job wouldn't exist. The quality organization wouldn't exist. And I use this because in the prevailing system of management, this is the goal, 100% white beads. And the mindset is, that's zero defects. That's what Phil Crosby called zero defects. All the beads are white. Now we're done. But then I say, well, wait a minute. Dr. Deming's 0.5 is to improve constantly forever. Constantly and forever. That's not being done. And so what I say to people is, I understand we can make the white beads faster. We can make the white beads cheaper. But in terms of never-ending improvement, how can you improve the quality of the beads if they're all white? And so what I challenge people with is, with consideration of the red bead experiment, is the achievement of zero red beads everywhere what it means to achieve zero defects? And are we then done? Are we done? And people will say, oh, we can make them faster. I know we can make them faster. We can make them cheaper. I know we can make them cheaper. But if they're all white, can we make them better? And what I find in my time with the Deming Institute, my time before, my time after, there's a real sense that zero defects is done. We're done. Yeah, we can make them faster and cheaper. But once we achieve 0 defects, that's as good as you can get in quality. And I say, no, you can do better than that. And what I'm talking about is you can go beyond red beads. And so outside my office is down the hallway is our master bedroom. Years ago, we went bowling as a family. In that bowling bag is my wife's bowling ball, bowling shoes, and gloves and whatnot. And we went bowling with a family a number of years ago with the high school students and other parents. And upon walking down the hallway, I walked into our bedroom, I noticed that my wife's bowling ball was in the doorway. So I thought that's kind of a strange place for the bowling bag. So I asked her why it was there. And she said she had asked our son to put it away. So I called him over and I said, Wilson, why is the bowling ball there? And his answer was enlightening. His answer, you have to think of, he was like 13 or 14 at the time. His answer was, Mom said put the bowling ball in the bedroom. Well, let's think about that. If I draw a line across the entranceway, is the bowling ball in the bedroom? Right? Is that a red bead or a white bead? So that's a white bead. So what's missing when people explain the red bead experiment, what I don't often see people do is challenge the idea that the achievement of 100% white beads is that the end of the line. What we talk about in the red bead experiment is the red beads are caused by the system, and red beads happen, that there'll always be red beads. My proposal is that the reason we have red beads is that we allow white beads to be really close to the doorway. And if they're really close to the doorway, then now and then they enter the hallway. So what we did at Rocketdyne was realize that things that are good have variation. So there's variation in the number of red beads, but there's also variation in the white beads. All the white beads do not have the same exact white color. All the white beads do not have the same exact size, shape, weight. And so what I learned from Dr. Taguchi is that things that are good have variation, that there's variation in things that are good. And that opens up a whole new opportunity for continuous improvement. So instead of stopping at all the beads that are red are gone and they're all white, now we're in the world of what Akoff would say, managing actions, treating everything as good as being identical. And what Dr. Deming would say is that's not the world we live in. But if quality is defined as conformance to requirements, then you're stuck. Then you're stuck thinking that white is white is white. 0 defects, another way of saying do it right the first time. So I want to close with inspiration from Ford and Toyota that I use in my consulting training. We used at Rocketdyne with great implementation. And so in the late 1960s, a gentleman by the name of Frank Pitt was the assembly plant manager at a Ford plant. He had his assembly team, buy competitors' cars. Why? Because his plan was to have a better sense of how competitors' cars assembled. Because he knew at the Ford plant that every time they assembled a Ford automobile, rubber mallets were used to bang the parts together. At that time, if 2 connecting parts within Ford could be assembled without a rubber mallet to bang it together, then the Ford plant called that snap fit. But snap fit was now and then. And so he bought competitors' cars, took them apart, and the majority of them assembled with mallets just like theirs. Those cars were coming from the same mindset, meaning they were coming from GM, coming from Chrysler, where the same thinking pervades that we've got things that are good and things that are bad. And in that world, you're going to get the same products. You're going to get things that bang together most of the time. Well, in Pip's experience, SnapFit was rare. To his amazement, one of the competitors' cars they bought, and it didn't come from the United States, it came from Japan. One of the cars they bought was 100% SnapFit. He was so excited by the results. First, he was stupefied. He did not believe the results. He had the assembly team take the car apart and put it together twice because he couldn't believe it could be assembled without mallets. He was so excited the second time, he called out corporate managers from GM, I'm sorry, from general, not from GM, the general manager from his division came out from Ford headquarters. His executives said to the assembly team, the customer will never notice this difference. That was 1969. The customers have noticed the difference. Slowly but surely, customers have noticed the assembly and performance results that Pip's team found in 1969 when they first took apart a Toyota pickup truck. Well, when you understand that the white beads have variation, then you understand that in order to get SnapFit, we have to shift the focus from the parts to the relationships between the parts. That is something that we organizations are masterful at. That is something that each of us at home in our personal lives, when we're working on projects around the house, in the garage, in the backyard, when we're in charge of all the parts at home, then we are also responsible for how they come together. And so my proposal to you is that we have the ability at home to do SnapFit because at home, we understand that the white beads, the pieces of fruit we're putting into a salad, we don't go to the supermarket and say, I'll take any apple. We're looking for the ripest apple or the ripest orange or the juiciest orange. My proposal is that at home, we understand that the white beads have variation. And we manage that variation to improve integration. And as a result, at home, we have things that go together pretty damn well. And the trouble we have doing that at work is that at work, we enter a me environment and our mindset changes to a focus on the parts. And so at work, we can't do what we do at home. But we do have the ability to manage variation in the white beads at home. In my consulting, I'm trying to get people to take that awareness from home and bring it to work. And as a result, at Rocketdyne, we had many opportunities and applications of 100% SnapFit integration, 100% SnapFit assembly, 100% SnapFit in terms of the performance of rocket engines by doing what we do at home. And let's see. All right. So I just want to close and say the awareness, the aim of this chapter, the prevailing style of management, Dr. Deming said, must undergo transformation. The system cannot understand itself. The aim of this chapter is to provide an outside view, a lens that Deming called a system of profound knowledge, provides a lens, a map of theory by which to understand the organizations that we're working. And so once the individual understands this, he'll have a place, something to do. He'll have a basis for judging his own decisions and for transformation of the organizations that he belongs to. And now we go back to the elements of profound knowledge. And then a reminder, it would be better if everyone would work together as a system, which is something that we organizations are masterful at, and me organizations just talk about. Imagine the possibilities when operating with an awareness of teamwork. If organizations develop a deeper and broader appreciation of continuous and connected learning, and if organizations could develop a deeper appreciation of what it means to think, learn, and work together. And I'm excited, Chris, that Tim Higgins spoke yesterday, because for nearly 30 years, I've been collaborating with Tim for 26 of those years at Rocketdyne. bringing this model, bringing all of this awareness to Rocketdyne and its suppliers and employees.